I worry very, very much that a bill such as 103 is reflective of a shrinking of our freedom of expression.
If we really want to dispel the phobia that's growing around Islam, we have to take time to actually genuinely go and learn this religion.
When they start criticizing a woman's right to choose the niqab, or when they start criticizing someone's autonomy, right, to practice their religion freely in the country, that's what I would say is Islamophobia.
This particular garb is rooted in patriarchal traditions, it's rooted in patriarchy, it's rooted in patriarchal interpretations of Islam
in
and
your
the Quran.
Point of view.
Oh,
but
this is the consensus. It's not my point of view. The consensus is that women
don't
need...
where?
The mullahs in Saudi Arabia addresses all
From the Zoomerplex in historic Liberty Village, the Zoomer with Marissa Semkiw.
Welcome to the Zoomer. I'm Marissa Semkiw. Today we'll be discussing variations on the same topic, political correctness. In Canada, this movement has most recently expressed itself in Motion 103, in Quebec's face-covering ban, and in Massey College's decision to drop the title Master for head of college. It'll be a challenging show, as each topic will likely incite strong reactions on both ends of the spectrum. But before we dive in, let's tee up the topic.
M103 is a motion first introduced by Liberal MP Iqra Khalid. It calls on federal politicians to condemn systemic racism and religious discrimination. The motion became a matter of fierce debate as opponents claimed it needlessly singled out Islamophobia and attempts to thwart freedom of speech when it comes to criticizing extreme Islamic practices.
I'm very, very happy that this motion has passed, and I'm really looking forward to the study now being conducted by the Standing Committee of Canadian Heritage.
Here's the thing, the motion has no teeth. Still, critics worry it's a precursor to a bill which could very well lead to censorship and prosecution.
The role of the state is not to defend the tenets of any particular faith. Rather, its role is to protect the right of the faithful to practice their faith, free of fear of reprisal, and to ensure that none of us are forced to worship that which we do not.
M103 passed in March 2017. A committee was then tasked to study the issue and report back with recommendations. Will those recommendations be used to create legislation? Only time will tell.
Farzana, why don't I start with you? So, as we just saw, it's a motion. It's not a law, which is nothing more than a proposal put forward by an MP in the House that says they want to do something. Okay, so the House decides it wants to combat Islamophobia. So what? What's the big deal?
I have serious issues with the way the motion is worded. First of all, I have issues with the word Islamophobia. It's all-encompassing because it can also mean Islam, criticism of Islam, not just of Muslims. So that in itself is problematic because, in my opinion, no ideology should be beyond reproach in that sense. And yes, I've heard this talk about the motion not being binding, but this isn't just about legalities. It's also about social censure. And what if I say this and, you know, my cousin will start saying, oh, you're an Islamophobe. And, you know, if you criticize polygamy or if you criticize the segregation of, or marginalization of Muslim women, which is a reality in many parts of the Islamic world and in this country.
So, Kofi, how about that? The fact that Islamophobia isn't defined, Farzana concerned that it'll expand to any type of criticism about Islam.
Yeah.
Is it a slippery slope?
Yeah, I mean, I take your point, Farzana. I think, though, it strains a bit of credulity to think that government is trying to undermine constitutional rights to freedom of speech, academic freedoms, by putting forward a non-binding motion. I don't think anybody would sincerely think that that's the purpose of this. If you want to take an approach towards this particular motion that divorces it from the context within which we live, a context within which Islamophobia is a reality, whether or not you want to characterize it or not, in a specific fashion, we all know what is meant by it.
It might be clear to you, but it's not clear to the public.
Yeah.
And the public is demanding an explanation, and there is intransigence on the part of the Liberal MPs too, including the Liberal MP, Iqra Khalid, who actually introduced the motion.
Yeah.
Why is she so stubborn about defining the word clearly for the Conservative MPs in this matter?
Would it extend to any type of criticism about Islam?
I don't think anybody...
Oh, absolutely
I don't think
absolutely.
anybody
It would
reasonably
include criticism of Islam. It would include criticism of Islamic practice.
That's a disingenuous articulation.
I don't think so.
Let's be
How
honest
is it
here.
disingenuous?
To suggest that a motion, which is meant to do what? Acknowledges the zeitgeist or the culture within which Muslims are living now. Every day that there's an event that occurs in the world, it could be anywhere in the world, that has some kind of Muslim person associated with it, there's a backlash that Muslims feel. There's a reality that Muslims have to now contend with.
And
this
Muslims
motion,
need to.
let me finish.
Yeah.
This motion is an attempt to recognize that and call it what it is.
Why single out Islamophobia?
When you have facts coming out from Stats Canada showing a 253% increase in hate crimes against Muslims, I think that is evidence enough that the Muslim community is being targeted.
But you're justifying
in
it. I mean, Christians actually are the most persecuted group in the world.
According to Stats Can, the Jewish community is more targeted than the Muslim community. However, the reason why a study like this is very important, being a researcher in this area, I can tell you that the research that we have right now, the numbers that we have right now are not accurate. The numbers that we have in terms of the hate crimes that exist are far less than what the reality is, because there is a lot of underreporting happening. There are certain segments of the Muslim community, refugees, new immigrants, who do not report hate crimes. They are more likely to be targeted, but less likely to report.
You know, Kofi said something very interesting, where you said we should look around the world at people's experiences. And certainly we'll see that Muslim people are victims of assaults and extremism all across the world, maybe disproportionately so, also victims of radical Islamic terrorism. But I think we also need to look at Muslim opinion around the world and talk about the general issue of Islamophobia and how it's looked at around the world. You said that it's pretty clear what it means to everyone. I don't think that's true at all. When you actually look at how Islamophobia laws have been brought out in other countries in the world, Pakistan and so forth, they actually have views of Islamophobia that do broaden to include people who simply criticize the religion. And there are people incarcerated, dozens of people in Pakistan right now who are incarcerated.
That's a
for
blasphemy.
And they use the word Islamophobia interchangeably.
No,
go and listen to how President Erdogan, for instance, talks about it.
He's
pushing
not Pakistani.
to broaden the concept. I'm aware. Well, there you go. It's an even bigger problem.
Pakistan. It's not just about Pakistan.
Turkey, Indonesia, it's many countries.
You're conflating Islamophobia with blasphemy.
They conflate those issues. Intellectually, it's conflated in the way they talk about it.
David?
Let me offer a perspective here. I'm the chair of the Muslim-Jewish Dialogue. We have been meeting over years, groups of adults and groups of high school students. And the overwhelming expression of opinion on the part of the Muslims who participate in the Muslim-Jewish Dialogue is, we fear Islamophobia. The word means something to us. We fled the concept of haram. We fled the concept of blasphemy law in our home country. How could you Canadians be so stupid as allow a bill like this to come forward? The Muslims that I'm speaking to and listening to are very, very clear. They understand that Islamophobia has a history. It's tied in with the Muslim Brotherhood. It was created in the 1930s. It finds expression in the United Nations Resolution 1618, which will be incumbent upon Canada and which will make any comment or criticism of Islam to be mentally deranged, to be racist, to be irrational.
Which begs the question, can I say, if I wanted to, can I say that I think Islam is a stupid, backwards religion?
You're entitled to say that, absolutely. I don't think that, you're entitled to say that we live in a free, democratic society.
And you're also entitled to file a human rights complaint against her for that reason, and you might actually prevail, which I think is what's wrong with the culture that this country's heading in. And Farzana made that point that there are cultural problems with this community
it isn't just
where Marissa
legalities.
could be censured for saying that.
It isn't just legalities. It's not just the fact that it's not legally
Why don't we bring
binding.
you in here?
I'm just like thinking about the whole issue right now. You guys keep on saying that Islamophobia is basically only going to target secular Muslims, right? And they're going to be saying that it's going to infringe their right to freedom of speech. It's not going to infringe their right to freedom of speech. They can criticize Islam any which way they want, right? I'm totally for that, right? But when they start criticizing a woman's right to choose the niqab, or when they start criticizing someone's autonomy, right, to practice their religion freely in the country, that's what I would say is Islamophobia.
And that's part of Islamic practice, in some groups at least. So that would be considered criticizing Islam, at least a brand of Islam.
But would you criticize the yarmulke? That's part of the Jewish religion now, isn't it? Right? It's an article of their faith. This is an article of
Two very different subjects, and we will touch on them when we come back. So when we come back, we'll debate Quebec's law banning the niqab and burqa while receiving public services. That's next.
Now, this bill is targeting less than 3% of the population, and it states that for us to access public services, we have to show our face. I already do that when I go to Health Canada.
Welcome back. The province of Quebec recently passed a controversial bill which requires people to uncover their face to receive provincial and municipal government services like riding the bus. Quebec's justice minister said the law applies when it's required for communication, identification, or security reasons. Opponents have accused the province of targeting Muslim women who wear a niqab or a burqa, and civil liberties advocates have since launched a legal challenge over the constitutionality of the ban, arguing it, quote, directly infringes on the freedom of religion of individuals. Before we jump in, here's Barbara Kay at this year's Idea City Conference talking about the origin of Muslim head coverings.
The hijab came into common usage only after 1979 and the Iranian Revolution. By 1982, it was, a rule was passed in Iran that all girls over the age of 6, regardless of faith, had to wear the hijab. As you see, before 1970, Muslim women were very confident in their Muslimhood, in their allegiance to Islam, but they looked like we look. After 1970, it was quite different. We have women in Afghanistan who've been put into body bags, and the hijab in Iran became a symbol of militant Islam, Islamism. So this is a symbol of political Islam whose aim is to is triumphalist and which is extremely hostile to the West.
So Barbara's point is this isn't really a straightforward issue of religious accommodation, that there is no religious obligation to wear a full face covering, and that it's actually a regional custom. And that's important because that's what the opponents of the law point to, that this is a violation of freedom of religion. So who's right? Ima.
I'm Muslim, visibly Muslim. I'm wearing the niqab, right? I'm wearing the hijab. I believe it's a part of my faith, which is Islam, right? And it's dictated in the Quran, right, for women to cover themselves in a modest way. Now, not all Muslims do it, like Farzana Hassan here, but we have the choice to adorn it the way we want to. Now, this bill is targeting less than 3% of the population, and it states that for us to access public services, we have to show our face. I already do that when I go to Health Canada, right? When I'm writing my exam at Ryerson University, I take off my niqab, show it to the TA, right? This is my face, this is Ima, right? Give them my card, and they'll verify that it's me, right? And it's usually a woman, right? They accommodate me. We're already listening to what the laws of the country are saying to show our face when necessary.
But then, to that point, it's not necessarily wrong. It's just consistent with what you're already doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but
so what's wrong with the bill then?
Why target? Why put them on the spotlight
They're not targeted.
like that? It's a spotlight being placed on an already stigmatized group.
Yeah,
Muslim women.
Are we here to pretend? Are we here to pretend that we don't know what's happening politically here? We all know that this is a grab at votes in a society, in a culture.
As if that it would be the first time politicians do something to grab votes.
Then let's admit that.
You said this targets 3% of the population, pointing out there 3% of the Canadian population is Muslim, but that's not true. It targets 3% of that 3%. We know that only about 3% of Muslim women actually wear the niqab, and then about 45% wear the hijab, and then 50% of other Muslim women don't wear the hijab. And you pointed out, let's talk about the elephant in the room, about the political element. Well, I agree with you there from another angle. The niqab is a very extremist garment around the world. There is only the most orthodox sects, the Wahhabists and the Salafists, who wear those garments. So we're having this whole conversation. We're having this whole conversation sort of ignoring that fact that this is a signifier, wearing the niqab. It denotes much more radical views that it should be socially acceptable to condemn.
Why would you say it's an extremist garment?
And plus, it's a security risk now. This particular garb is rooted in patriarchal traditions. It's rooted in patriarchy. It's rooted in patriarchal interpretations of Islam
and
the Quran.
Point of view. But in Aima's point of view...
This is the consensus. It's not my point of view. The consensus is that women don't need...
Where?
The mullahs in Saudi Arabia addresses all
scholars that women don't need to cover their face. This is a consensus of Orthodox Islamic scholars. It's not my opinion.
So hold on. So I just want to point something out, because this is this goes right to the heart of what we want to be in Canada. We can talk about Saudi Arabia. We can talk about Pakistan. We're talking about Canada, the Canadian context. If a woman chooses to cover her face for sincerely held religious reasons, and as long as those reasons don't infringe on
they do.
Hold on. As long as those reasons don't infringe on other people's rights in a way that is unjustifiable in a free and democratic society, we have a duty to accommodate. That's what our courts have said around religious rights. When politicians...
But a duty of accommodation
let me finish.
means that if someone is a robber wearing a niqab, if someone is a terrorist wearing a niqab, is that person one of our...
Okay, let Kofi finish his thought.
You know, this is a kind of absurd claim. I wish people would be more honest. You don't like niqab. It doesn't. You feel viscerally you don't like it. It doesn't look good. Don't manufacture reasons for it. Just say you don't like it. I don't like the way it looks on you. I don't like the way.
Why?
I don't like the way you identify.
What in
Canadian values is the reason why someone might not like it?
Canadian values, sir, are a constantly fluidly changing thing.
And
ultimately a thing that reflects and represents the diversity of Canada. The Constitution is to be interpreted in a way that accords with our multicultural society. This is multiculturalism. Like it or not, that's the Canada that we have chosen to live in.
It's an abuse of multiculturalism.
Okay, that's your opinion.
I just want to say one more thing, though, Kofi. When you mentioned about forget about what's going on in Saudi Arabia, let's talk about here in Canada. I don't buy that, because right now in Peterborough, there's a gentleman who's trying to get these white supremacist rallies going on. But then he says, oh, no, it's not really white supremacy. He has a giant swastika tattoo on his chest. He's like, oh, don't worry, I just did that when I was young and idealist. I'm like, sorry, buddy, I'm not buying it. I know what they do down south. I know what they did decades ago in those Klan rallies. You've got this. I'm not buying it. Just like I will not differentiate between the extremist Wahhabist niqab extremism going on there and when it's brought here. You can't distinguish the two. There are origins. There are connections.
Okay, when we come back, did Massey College cave to political pressure? We'll discuss that next.
Changing the title at Massey College, getting rid of the guy. I mean, are people so hurt that this is irreconcilable and we can't come together as a community again?
Here at Massey College, we're getting reaction to the controversy that resulted in the resignation of Professor Michael Maris and changing the use of the title Master as head of the school after Maris made a slavery-related remark to a black student. The incident happened at lunch. The professor was sitting with 3 junior fellows when the master of the college joined them. Maris turned to the student and remarked, "You know this is your master, eh? Do you feel the lash?"
In a place where I would feel like I would want to be welcomed, you know, and if I'm being targeted because of the color of my skin or whatever social identifier that pointed me out to this person, yeah, it would definitely leave me upset and angry.
Do you recall the incident happening?
Very clearly.
Yeah? And what were your thoughts at that moment?
My thoughts were that the professor who used the term master and asked the question, have you felt the lash, I think didn't understand how harmful and hurtful that would be to members of the college who happen to be people of color. And I think it was a profound mistake.
With all the stuff in the States and all these protests that are going on, to say something like that, it's a thing that's very sensitive at the moment and probably shouldn't have been said at all or even thought of.
Have you changed your title in the meantime?
Yeah, when the event took place and the college issued an apology, I set aside the title Master, pending the report of the task force on what the title should be going forward. So now I'm being referred to as head of college, and it works just fine.
If it makes you that uncomfortable, then it shouldn't be part of like the school's vocabulary, as it were.
I think it was an unfortunate situation where a smart and accomplished person said something incorrectly, inappropriately, regretted it immediately, but I think the reaction has been overblown.
Michael Maris said this in an interview recently. He said, "Where was the due process? Where was the effort to hear me out? Where was the effort to relate to 30 years of scholarship that have a lot to do with human rights? There is something cruel and reckless about this campaign." He went on to say, "I was so sorry for having wounded someone, but nothing availed." So Anthony, I'll start with you. This was a man, a devoted scholar for 30 years. He was awarded the Order of Canada in 2008. He was pushed out by the college. Did the punishment fit the crime?
And I think that's the integral question here to ask. There's a question of disproportionality in terms of response. So changing the title at Massey College, getting rid of the guy. I mean, are people so hurt that this is irreconcilable and we can't come together as a community again after it? We get these stories and they become flashpoints, and we see how we can kind of run them into the ground with reactions. So should he have said that line? No way. Should he have apologized? Absolutely. Did we go too far in the reaction? Did they go too far? I think so. You know, we talk about snowflake generation. Let's find ways to come together over this.
Hugh Siegel, the headmaster, said, of course, that he wasn't fired. He resigned, though it's pretty clear he was pushed out. There was a petition signed by 200 faculty members calling for his resignation, which is to say, do you think the punishment fit the crime?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have to take people at their word when they say that they apologize. Everybody makes mistakes. But at the same time, we do have to hold people accountable, particularly people who are put in positions where they are in charge of educating the next generation of leaders, of thought leaders, of thinkers, people who don't understand the power of words and how that can evoke all kinds of realities for people. So, I mean, I take the point that, yes, I mean, people do make mistakes. And of course, there's going to be a campaign launched because that school is setting a standard for other institutions across the board. That school has to represent other people's views and experiences in life. And of course, other faculty and students are going to feel aggrieved by this type of comment coming from a person in a very senior role.
So not only, though, was Mr. Morris pushed out, the school then decides to drop the title of master. Massey College is not the first institution of higher learning to do this. Harvard, Yale, Princeton have now done it. The term master holds numerous different meanings. Where do you stop then?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's fair. I mean, this is a common sort of refrain to a criticism. It's a slippery slope. If we drop master in this particular context, then who knows? Maybe we'll have to drop master. I don't think that's a type of level of reasoning that I think.
But we're already down the slope, because I could see us having a debate panel, you know, a few years ago where Morris was let go, and then I had said, well, what next? Are we going to get rid of the term master? Because even though it has nothing to do with it, you know, people would say, oh, it triggers, and then you know, people would say, no, drop that slippery slope argument. I mean, we're already going down the slope.
We have to be very, very careful in recognizing two things. Number one, words that were appropriate at one point in time may be less appropriate at another point in time. And number two, what's sacrosanct? What word sooner or later will also not come into question. And so what we face is the larger issue for me, which isn't one person's clumsy attempt at humor, he's acknowledged that, but rather, are universities going to be closed-minded spaces? Are we going to try and turn universities into conflict-free zones? And that's what I'm hearing. I'm hearing from the students that I teach, it's politically incorrect to be able to speak. We really are not about a free speech environment at this university. And that, as an ethicist, caused me concern.
Okay, so you guys mentioned, you know, having a master of education, being a master of cooking. Now, what we need to remember here is that the master of the college, he's in a position of power, privilege, and in charge of other human beings, not inanimate things, not cooking or education or papers, other human beings. So in that context, for that role, that word doesn't work because we're talking about human beings, and the fact that he was in a position of authority and power over, like Kofi said, a diverse body of students.
But there's so many labels that are denoting, you know, different power lines: chief executive officer, sergeant, you know, corporal. I mean, prime minister means you're prime, you're above the rest of them.
And the origin of the term is rooted in master of one's craft, not in this master-slave inference. Of course, that's not what it was meant. There are multiple connotations here, but that's not what that was meant to be.
I just want to say, as a person, as we are a panel of people of color, that just because you've been desensitized to the experiences that we have doesn't mean that we are sensitive to that. What we're trying to say is that those words, when used in that context, can be abused, and they have been abused, as seen with this case, right? As a Black person, you can speak. I'm not going to speak for you, but having to live with that constant reminder that it's okay for people to say those certain things to you and then say that that's under the freedom of speech. It's not under the freedom of speech.
Nobody's saying it's okay to be racist towards others. People are just saying when it comes to the word master, it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, the barometer of offense is continually dropping, and that's what makes us have to reform all these different rules and institutions. And eventually we have to stand up to say, no, let's not let the barometer of offense keep dropping. Let's just be resilient altogether as a community.
Okay, hold that thought. We'll be right back.
There are pockets of bigotry and racism everywhere, but it's benign. It's benign. We're not a criminal society. We are a very law-abiding country, and I think that we have lost track of that in this conversation.
On the campus of Massey College, which led to a professor resigning and the institution dropping the title of master as its leader and replacing it with head of school. Now, Sabrina, you were just saying something before the break.
You used the word resilience, which I have a problem with. I actually wrote a piece on that recently, that, you know, resilience means probably something very different to you than it does to someone like me. Now, I have had to show a lot of resilience in higher education, my education process, because I've faced a lot of discrimination, you know, discrimination towards me in terms of my race, my gender, my religion. And I can tell you, it's not fun to be resilient. I don't want to be resilient. I don't want to have to be resilient in the face of these things. I would like my daughter to not have to be resilient. I would like to change the dialogue and the narrative so that resilience isn't something that's just expected from people in minority.
But that's just you. I have done a study of Black responses to racism in Canada in the 19th century. It was part of my master's thesis. And their resilience was the redeeming factor that brought meaning and life to Blacks who were fighting against oppression, fighting against slavery. And so your opinion is your own, which I respect, but let's understand that minority groups can profit from resilience, can profit from developing their own sense of confidence and pride and becoming part of the Canadian mosaic.
I want to give you an example. So I went to a high school here in Toronto called Runnymede. Some of you might know Runnymede. It used to be a very good basketball school. We used to be called the Runnymede Red Men. Initially when I first went to the school. Later on, they changed the name of the school to the Runnymede Ravens because red men, you know, it evokes a kind of pejorative type of thinking about Aboriginal and First Nations people. Now, a person might say, oh, these guys are too sensitive and what's wrong with saying red men and whatnot, but what did I get from that as a high school student? I learned that words matter. I learned that how I think about people and what I call them might frame the way I deal with them and might frame the way I deal with other people. The point I'm making is that what we're talking about and what we're really wrestling with is the reality that our society is starting to reflect its diversity as different communities now move into the mainstream and are asking for the society to better represent and reflect who they are and live up to its potential. And that includes changing the names of institutions. You'll see that happen in the United States. Why are they asking in the United States to have all these statues removed of Confederate leaders? Why are they asking for that? Because there's an acknowledgement that, you know what, this statue that we hold pride in as a dominant people is a symbol of oppression and offense to a good chunk of our society. Sorry, go ahead.
This comes at a cost, because I've had a school board approach me one of their schools, as an ethicist, is Tecumseh School. Tecumseh is a venerable leader in Canadian history, but he was a slave holder. And the question is, are we now obligated to change the name of that school? As an ethicist, what's your opinion?
Yeah.
We have to be very, very careful. Mores and values are changing all the time. Are we going to delegitimize things that are worth saving for political correctness?
So you see, this kind of narrative and its response is consistent with typically of a community that doesn't want to have a more inclusive reflection and representation in its laws, governance, and policies. And
I think that's marring all Canadians when you say that.
I'm not trying to mar all Canadians. I'm not trying to mar all Canadians.
Very unpatriotic and unfair.
To say people don't want
I would like to be unpatriotic. Like, how am I unpatriotic?
What's your favorite word, Farzana?
Okay,
it's my opinion, and I'm
okay, Farzana, go ahead.
But he's Canadian.
I'm Canadian. I don't.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I'm a Canadian woman. I'm a Muslim woman. I'm a Muslim woman of color. I have lived in Canada for 33 years. My 3 kids were born here. Not once in 33 years have I experienced any kind of racism.
Wow.
I've told people what my name is. The response I get, oh, that's a very pretty name. I've worn traditional garb. Oh, lovely. I have never once experienced racism in this country.
You're fortunate then, because that's not the experience of the vast majority of racism.
And if there is racism, yes, there is racism. There's bigotry and racism. There are pockets of bigotry and racism everywhere.
Pockets.
But it's benign. It's benign. We're not a criminal society. We are a very law-abiding country. And I think that we have lost track of that in this conversation.
I just want to say racism is not just the experience you face, it's also the systems that upheld white supremacy and upheld
There are
powers
Muslims working at security jobs in airports.
But that doesn't mean anything.
Oh, really?
It
doesn't?
Oh, wow.
If there was systemic racism, there
Your
would be no
experience doesn't
Muslim,
validate the
given the
experience of
threat
others.
of terrorism in this country and everywhere.
There were slaves that fought in the Civil War. There were people who had no rights who fought in the First and Second World War. Does that mean that when they got back home, they were...
How
they
is
were
that
treated...
relevant to all
Because
this? I'm talking about the contemporary Canadian society.
I'm very troubled by the attempt to broaden this term white supremacy to mean sort of everything and all the systems out there, because it is so backwards looking and doesn't reflect the way our demographic is going. When I drop my child off for school, I look at all the other kids in the playground. I have no clue what background they are. They're all blended families and so forth. I think we need to spend more time focusing on our similarities and our differences.
Just look at the audience members here. How many of them are people of color and how many of them are white? That just goes to show something, right?
I don't know, are you making an accusation against the audience?
I'm not making an accusation against anybody. I'm just saying that look who the majority here are.
This is proving our point.
Okay,
Everybody's
when we return, we'll hear
here.
from the audience. So don't go away.
I am just wondering if political correctness has proceeded so far and moved so far that we can no longer have intellectual, honest debates about the various issues.
To the roundtable.
Thank you. My name is Jo Cook, and I have one question. I am just wondering if political correctness has proceeded so far and moved so far that we can no longer have intellectual, honest debates about the various issues.
Political correctness can be a problem if it means, as we heard expressed previously, that someone doesn't have the right to be able to construct a narrative or analyze a person's position or resiliency in the past because you're not part of that group. So if presumably I am not a Muslim, I can't comment on Islam. If I am not a black person, I can't comment on or understand the depth of black experience. That's political correctness, and that's what I heard said here by one of the panelists, and that's a problem for me, because I'd like to think we share more of a common humanity than is being presented.
And in fact, I actually think it was Michael Maris who said we may reach a point soon when only black people can teach black history in our institutions.
But why can't they? They have more knowledge. They've experienced it, right? They lived the experience.
Can a white person? Can a white person not adequately teach black history?
I don't believe so because
you don't believe so.
I don't believe so at all.
There we go. Here we are. Yes.
There you go.
Intolerance.
It's not intolerance. Let me just give you an
based
example.
on skin
Let me
color.
give you an
19th
example.
century history of Acadian black families moving to Nova Scotia. Nobody was alive then.
No, listen, I'm just trying to say that you wouldn't tell, for example, you wouldn't let Donald Trump speak on science and say global warming isn't real when a scientist has the facts and has the evidence to prove that global warming is real.
That's not the same thing.
No, that is the same thing because a black person, it's their history, right? A white person will take things out of context, right? Let things be, let certain things be valid. For example, the Confederate statues, right? Who are the main people saying that they should still be in existence, that they should still stand there?
There are many non-Muslim
Muslim
scholars in universities across the world. Are you okay with them being professors of Muslim studies?
Are you talking about teaching the Sirah, teaching the Quran, teaching the Hadith? Are you talking about
They
those?
are not imams. I mean
They're not
professors
imams.
at
Okay,
universities around the world.
So they won't be allowed
so they
according
have a
to you.
critical analysis of Islam, so that's what they're teaching, right?
Sorry, so, you know...
or they're preaching the religion, because there's two different things, right? You wouldn't get a non-Muslim to preach.
You should not be
practice
preaching Islam in a public university.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying what I'm trying to say is that you shouldn't have people who aren't part of that community trying to teach or trying to influence the dialogue because they're not part of the community.
So you're gonna have to lay off thousands of people.
We're here to speak objectively and honestly. So that's one particular position some people hold. I personally don't hold that view.
Thank you.
Okay, I personally don't hold that view. But there are some people who take that view, I don't take that view. I think that there is utility in good scholarship, regardless of where the person comes from. I took African history at University of Toronto, African politics rather. My teacher was a white South African, one of my mentors and somebody who I've learned and benefited a lot from. So I do think it is possible for a person to teach a subject and not necessarily be from that particular persuasion. But does that mean that we shouldn't recognize perhaps the sort of barriers that might have been put in place in the past that may have deterred or dissuaded individuals from that particular group from assuming those roles as teachers and as the sort of leaders in those particular subject areas? We have to recognize those things.
People are negatively judged sometimes because of their skin color, their gender, their height, all these sorts of things. Why would you? That's the way people are born. I mean, this is just, you're just an idiot if you're judging people based on those ways. Religion is an idea that you are choosing to adopt, and for some reason, religion has been held up to this great status alongside the way you are born, and it is just quite frankly not. And I think one of the challenges, and to Joe's original question about, political correctness, I think people are being driven out of the public square for just challenging ideas, which is what, very robust criticism of say, the niqab is.
Okay, thanks, Joe. We'll be right back with some final thoughts.
On Fight Back with Libby Znaimer, Mo voices his concerns with the current state of immigration law.
Well, I'm very, very upset. Something has to be done. I know people believe in civil liberties and stuff like that. People have to be checked, even if it means privacy checkups. They have to check people that are coming in with bags that look suspicious. The civil liberties have to just mind their own business, and these people that are going to do evil, they have to be found out, and they have to be checked, and they have to be arrested.
And by email, Diana asks about how she can re-watch our political correctness episode. Thank you for your question, Diana. You can find full episodes at www.thezoomertv.com.
Welcome back. We'll hear final thoughts from our panelists now, and we'll start to my left. Anthony.
Well, tying in M103 and Bill 62, Marissa, when it comes to, say, looking at Christianity, I think regular Canadians, North Americans, folks in the West, they have a broader frame of reference, so they don't lump all of Christianity in together. But when we're talking about Islam, we lump it all together, and I think the one thing I'd encourage everyone to do is look at the broad hues in there and exactly how there are a lot of extremist sects, Wahhabism, Salafism, that do have elements around the world. Those elements are coming to Canada, and what role do they play in this conversation? This sort of black and white thing, it isn't working.
Well, we're talking about accommodation, and I think that the accommodation needs to be a two-way stream. And I think that Canadian society is accommodating quite a bit. In fact, I think it's accommodating intolerance in many, many ways. And I think that those who are promoting intolerance, they are the ones who need to accommodate. And they're the ones who need to develop this sort of feeling of camaraderie between them and people of other faiths and religious communities and ethnic communities.
I'm optimistic that we are forging together as people of different color and different religion and different political perspectives to create a more inclusive and open and just Canadian society. But I worry very, very much that a bill such as 103 is reflective of a shrinking of our freedom of expression. And I will do everything I can to try and work together with other Canadians in dialogue and discussion to make sure that the unequal and pejorative and dangerous concepts inherent in Bill 103 are defeated and never see the light of legislation.
I actually believe everyone has equal rights here in Canada. I believe every person should be accommodated and should feel free to express their religion, to feel free to be themselves to their truest potential, right? By inhibiting me from wearing the niqab, you're going to start inhibiting Sikhs from wearing their turbans, or Christians from wearing their veils, right? Or tell nuns that they can't go to the nunnery anymore because we're living in a secular society. They shouldn't go practice what they want to believe in. And we shouldn't use our differences to divide each other, right? Instead, we should come together so that we can hold others accountable that try to divide the society and try to make us hate each other, because that's what happened when we see people going into churches and mosques and killing each other.
So I don't come from the Muslim tradition. My family is Christian. My father's a pastor, and my mother, she's also an ordained minister as well. So I came to Islam freely of my own will over 6 years ago. I've met many Muslims in that time, many of whom know nothing of their own religion. Many of whom wear niqab, many of whom don't wear niqab, many of whom pray, and they know absolutely nothing about their religion. They don't know what Salafism means. They don't know what Wahhabism means. But at the same time, there are many critics of Islam that don't know anything about their religion as well. My problem is that when we're operating from a position of ignorance, there's so much ignorance about Islam. People really have no conception of idea about this 1,400-year tradition that has as diversity of views and positions as we find in the common law. It's a religion that is a literate-based religion, that is a legalistic religion, and the views are wide-ranging and vast. Some are on the left, some are on the right, and the vast majority of people don't even take the time, unfortunately, to spend time learning more about it. If we really want to dispel the phobia that's growing around Islam, we have to take time to actually genuinely go and learn this religion from proper sources, and not use our own biases and prejudices or even our own bad experiences in our lifetimes to prejudge and predetermine what this religion means and what people practicing it are attempting to do.
I'd just like to say that Bill 62 sexualizes women. Whether you're putting the niqab on a woman, the hijab on a woman, or you're removing it, you're policing a woman's body. And from a feminist perspective, I don't think that the government has a place in the closet of women, and women should have the right to choose what they want to wear, what not to wear. And something like Bill 62, the criticisms around Motion 103, they once again just put a spotlight on this community, the Muslim community, which perpetuates that, furthers that irrational fear that leads to more hate crimes and violence against this community. So we need to really think hard about, how we approach these issues.
All right, well, thank you to my panelists and to our audience in studio and at home for watching. We'll see you soon. For now, it's time to zoom out.